hormonal birth control. Now all the men will be fleeing this video. So I wanted to talk today about my experience with hormonal birth control because I think that there's far too few conversations going on about this for a younger generation. So this video will be my personal experience, how I made my decision about what type of birth control initially, how that changed, also my experience with Skyla IUD, and how I was able to kind of get my body back in balance after using that. So if you are interested in learning what I went through so you can make your own decision, follow along. So you guys will notice I'm in a little bit of a different environment. I'm actually down in my garden. And so I wanted to bring you out here because I felt like that's my rooster Piglet, so he may interrupt us, but you know, I wanted to be a little bit more open and less teaching this week. And so my experience with birth control started before I got married. And so because of that, I ended up doing a lot of research. So I had time, I knew I was planning for this, and I did a ton of research. So I looked at all of the available options. Not only did I look at them myself, but I consulted with a gynecologist, I consulted with naturopathic doctors, and ultimately I landed on the Skyla IUD partly because I couldn't understand how the copper IUD worked. I didn't know how or why the IUD with just copper in it would prevent pregnancy. I was concerned that it would cause miscarriages. And I wasn't getting any confident response from any of the professionals that I spoke with about that not just causing miscarriages or abortions every single month. And so the hormones at least gave me the reassurance that I wasn't getting pregnant and miscarrying every month. But because of that, I did have that. And part of the reason I made that choice was because I'm going to naturopathic medical school, and I wanted to make sure that I could prevent pregnancy before I graduate from that program. So that's one of the reasons that I chose that, and it has a very high rate of success in preventing pregnancies. And so for me, that was the right choice. For other people, that might not be the right choice, but that was something that I weighed because of my own personal decisions about when I wanted to have children, and I didn't want to have children for quite a length of time. So an IUD fit that. So that's part of how I made that choice. Now I did, like I said, a ton of research. So I looked at pretty much every possible birth control option. So that's non-hormonal, hormonal, the success rates of them, what the risks were each of them for women's health, because you are changing how your body works, because your body naturally wants to get pregnant, stay pregnant. That's how our body is intended to function. And so you're really putting something kind of in the way of that. And no matter what method of birth control you use, that's the result. You're trying to prevent pregnancy, and there are methods that are much lower impact than others, and I'll talk about that in some future videos, but that was part of my decision. So like I said, did a lot of research, and there were a few other options that I was looking at. I was looking at a diaphragm, but when I consulted with both the gynecologist and the naturopathic doctor, they both said that if you really want to prevent pregnancy, it's not a high rate of success birth control option. So that was part of what discouraged me from going that route or using barrier methods. So I talked about the copper IUD, and like I said, I didn't understand how it worked. Because of that, I don't personally feel comfortable putting things in my body that I don't understand. If I don't understand it, then I don't feel comfortable eating it, putting it in any place of my body, and exposing myself to it because I don't know all of the potential concerns. I don't know how it could affect me, and I'm a rather sensitive person. So for me, that was a decision that I made because I couldn't confidently say, yes, I understand how that works. So my opinions changed a little bit, so I'll talk about that a little bit later in this video as well. So next we're going to go into kind of my experience with the Skyla IUD. So the Skyla IUD was at the time the lowest hormone option. So it had the lowest amount of hormones, and it was there weren't other IUDs with as low hormones out, but it was new. And so I chose that because I felt like having the lowest amount of synthetic hormones in my body would be the best for me, just because of my own, like I said, I'm kind of a sensitive person. So that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of protect about myself. And my process of getting the IUD went pretty smoothly. I didn't have a lot of pain. The insertion process was fairly straightforward. I think maybe I impressed my gynecologist with not yelping in pain. And so some of those things came a little bit easier for me. After you get an IUD placed, you often have bleeding. That did happen for about a week or two. And then things kind of get back to normal. And so I got my IUD in October of 2016. So that was about 5 years ago. And for the first few months, it was kind of normal. My cycle was a little bit off, only because you kind of have 2 weeks of bleeding when it's inserted, and that can throw your body off of its normal rhythm. And so kind of by the time I had been getting married, which was that January, I did have a fairly normal cycle, but I was noticing it was much lighter. I had a rather light cycle, and so now it was down to about 2 days, maybe another day of spotting. And so that was something that was very strange to me. I also had noticed within that time, I was planning a wedding, so I was under a lot of stress. Me and my husband were building a tiny house. I'll maybe pop a picture in up here so you can see that. But so there was a lot of stress going on in my life. I wasn't reacting to the stress very well. And so part of that was just me thinking like, okay, well, I have a lot of stress that's unusual. So how can I better manage my stress? And so I had been exercising quite a bit, about 4 or 5 times a week, if not more. I was an active runner. I was in dance. So I was taking 2 dance classes at a time often. I was going to the gym, I was running. So a lot of activity. And before I got married, I ended up gaining about 15 pounds. I went from 138 to about, I guess maybe 10 pounds, 10 to 12 pounds to almost 150 in 2 months, 2.5 months of having this IUD. Now for me, I thought, okay, well, I'm under stress. I do eat rather well. So I don't know, maybe this is just the stress of wedding planning that's getting to me. And then, so during that process, like I said, I was under a lot of stress. I was not acting very emotionally stable either. And because I wasn't acting very emotionally stable, that came out to my friends and family. So I wrote these 2 months off as just kind of being overly stressed. I was very stressed, and so I kind of wrote it off, but I wasn't acting normal to my friends, my family, people close to me especially, and started to bleed into my work life. And so one of the things that I started picking up on was that for about the week of my period, I kind of had a reverse PMS. The rest of the month, I would be extremely emotionally unstable, to the point of being severely depressed, severely anxious, very angry to a point where I couldn't walk myself down from that anger for anybody. And then the other thing that I experienced was my period continuing to disappear. So I get married and I'm on my honeymoon and I have my period, and I call it that just because it was the shortest period I'd ever had. I think it was maybe a day and a half. It was at that point very unusual to have basically no period, to have basically PMS symptoms, but then I ended up not having the bloating and the kind of water retention go away when I got my period like it normally did. So the next month I ended up having spotting, and that was it. I was concerned I was pregnant, and so I took a pregnancy test. I wasn't pregnant, and it kind of continued like that for the next 3 or 4 months, until my period completely disappeared after that. And with each month I gained about 5 to 8 pounds. I felt extremely angry with my husband. We were a new husband. He also had an accident within this time frame. And so we were in the hospital and living at my in-laws because our tiny house wasn't ready. It was a construction-related accident. But partly because of that, I kept continuing to gain weight. I thought, okay, maybe it's the stress of the accident, things like that. But even afterwards, when we started moving into the tiny house, we were eating really well. That didn't go away. It didn't subside. So then about a year in, so October, I called my gynecologist to have the IUD removed and exchanged for a copper one, partly because within that time period I did take some biology classes as part of my track to become a naturopathic doctor, and I learned how copper IUD works, and I wouldn't have been in the same friendships that I have right now. My family probably wouldn't be in relationship with me, and neither would I be married to my husband if I continued to allow those hormones to be in my body and to affect my emotions continually month after month. Within that time frame, I had now gained about 50 to 60 pounds. So when I had that IUD removed, so then I ended up having to wait for about 3 months to have my IUD removed. That's how long it took for my appointment at the gynecologist to come up once I made it. And I ended up switching out to the copper IUD that following February of 2018. So like I talked about, I'd had a lot of mood disorders from this. I'd lost my period. And I had gained about 65 pounds in the span of a year. For someone who is working out 4 to 5 times a week, that is abnormal. Someone who's eating primarily all organic, vegan, plant-based, all of that, it was just not something that could continue, and it didn't make sense for a long time until I had figured that out. When I had the IUD removed, I did stop gaining weight. It took a few months, about 3, for my mood to come back into balance and for my period to come back even to some mild extent. And at that point, my period was about every 50 days, if not more. So, I was pretty frustrated, to be honest. While I did want to prevent pregnancy, I didn't want to hurt my own body, because ultimately that could affect my future children. My little eggs. I'm just gonna give the construction workers a little break here because they're jackhammering. So I'm gonna keep going once they're done. My 2 little eggs. So if you've experienced anything like this, I'd love for you to give me a thumbs up, or if you're willing to, share your experience in the comments. I'd love to connect and just, like I said, open up this conversation for other women who are going to be younger than us and possibly going through that transition, or people who have been trying to have kids and now they want to prevent pregnancy. Okay, so now in this timeline, I've had the copper IUD placed February of 2018. Okay, so now in this timeline, I have the copper IUD placed, and I had about 2 weeks of bleeding again for the IUD being placed, but after that, I still didn't have my period regularly. And to be honest, when I went in to talk to my gynecologist, I had expressed concerns when I had the IUD placed because of gaining weight on the hormones. She kind of wrote them off. I had noticed that she was also using an IUD that was similarly and had gained probably a similar amount of weight within that time frame that I did. She then proceeded to tell me to food journal in order to help losing weight, which was very ironic because I know what I eat. I wasn't overeating. And I keep a rather clean diet when I go out to eat. Occasionally I might eat something different, and I was kind of losing hope of being back to my normal healthy weight. And so I didn't feel comfortable not having my period normally. And so because of that, I did learn and I had to teach myself some things about how to bring my hormones back into balance. And I did that. I have, after about 6 months, so after about 6 months, I was able to get my period back to a normal regular cycle. And so now that my period was back on cycle, I would have between 28 and 32 day cycle. It was back to the normal bleeding rhythm, about 4 days for me, so rather short, not heavy. And I did have some cramps to start out with. At this point, those cramps have pretty much completely gone away, except on very rare occasions. And even now, you know, I do have the copper IUD still. I found that that's my preferred method of birth control at this point. So at this point, I have the copper IUD, and I really don't have any cycle imbalances. I don't have any cramps, even though women say that the IUD can cause really bad cramps. I don't get them. So I wanted to share my experience because there are young women, and to be honest, I was one of them. I felt alone in making my decision. I not only felt alone in making my decision, but I also felt as though there wasn't someone I could go to really ask and trust. Both the doctors that I went to left it up to me to make the decision about what I wanted to do, but they weren't really answering some of my questions that I had or explaining how things worked to me. And understanding how a copper IUD works gave me more confidence to be able to feel comfortable using it. Also, I ended up feeling as though, you know, my doctor didn't take it seriously that I wasn't having my normal period, even though you're supposed to on Skyla with the lowest level of hormones. So I'm just going to talk through some of this jackhammery. So I apologize. I hope this can be a little bit more calm than maybe I see that it might be. But, you know, one of the things that I wish that I had been told before I started was that the Skyla IUD, Mirena and Loletta, they all are using the same hormone that's in Plan B. So a Plan B pill that you take to abort a pregnancy, that's the same hormone that you're putting in your body constantly for the duration of the time you have that IUD. Now that's a very serious thing to be considering. You should be aware of that before you put it into your body. I wish that someone had told me, and that's part of why I wanted to share my experience, because I think that women should be empowered. They should know that what their options are. If they do want to choose a hormonal birth control, they should know what the side effects are. Weight gain is something that some women reported with hormonal birth control, hormonal IUDs, but it was kind of brushed under the rug by medical industry. And to be honest, it was rather frustrating to feel like it wasn't an acknowledged side effect, even though I had concerns about it before, and I ended up experiencing it. And it was, from my gynecologist perspective, my fault that I had gained so much weight. And I've seen other friends and family gain a significant amount of weight when they're starting birth control. So some of those things really need to be talked about more for our young women to be able to make a decision that's right for them and have more information in order to make that decision for themselves. So this is my experience. It wasn't the greatest experience with hormonal birth control, as you can tell. I was kind of the Hulk on that. And so I want to save other women the trouble of having to try it for themselves if they feel any hesitation. And I want to encourage you, as if I were encouraging my younger self, to go with your gut instinct. Whatever you feel is the right choice for you, go with it. Because I had felt the copper IUD was probably the best choice for me, and I went in an opposite direction. And so that was something that I wish I had listened to more. So this is my experience with hormonal birth control with the Skyla IUD, and how I've recovered a little bit. I'll be sharing a little bit more in future weeks, as well as in my Feminine Rhythms course, of how I balanced my hormones, how I brought my cycle back to normal from being not there at all. And so if you want to learn more about that, there'll be links in the description below. And until next time, be well.